welcome back to another episode of Fishing Without Bait, a lifetime without definitive expectations, where we look for people not to find themselves, but help create themselves. If you have the honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness to try, a few pixie dust sprinkles of those, you're on your way. And, as an added bonus today, we continue our conversation with the delightful and insightful Regina Honey Badger. What I hear you talking about, Regina, is what we try to help people do, is it's figuring out what's important. Because most things are not. I speak at a lot of rehabs, and generally I talk to them about there's so much chatter going on inside of our heads that creation could be happening 10 feet away from us and we wouldn't know it.
Mm-hmm.
So what we have to do is help people develop a mind of awareness, like a beginner's mind, not an expert's mind.
Mm-hmm.
Experts' minds have blinders on them. Beginner's minds are like a 3 or 4-year-old child who look at everything with wonder and joy and excitement.
Yeah, it's a sponge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So on your spiritual journey, some people, I shouldn't say most people, some people are very judgmental about that type of approach.
Yeah, I experienced a lot of that. And like I said, I think that was one of the hardest parts of this journey was this backlash of like, well, like, don't you see that I'm different? Like, I feel different. And I like to think that I look a little bit different from it. And I'm, and I understand that, sometimes people wonder, like, especially when, you're someone like a professional wrestler who puts on this persona, it's like, well, what's the gimmick and what's real? And that's what's kind of funny about the Badger persona. We were talking earlier about how I actually legally changed my name to Regina Badger because I really think, again, how pro wrestling was pointing me in this direction of who I was going to become is when I went through my divorce, I didn't want to return back to that person. I had really kind of, created this person through this persona in what I was aiming for on a higher level. And, so changing your name is very fulfilling for me. It was, I remember when I got that paperwork, I burst into tears because it was like, yeah, this is who I am. Like, and this is my authentic self. But again, I've gotten a lot of backlash. The other piece that I've in my journey that was a crucial, cornerstone of it was discovering Dr. Jordan Peterson's lectures. I first found him on YouTube, and then I, got his books, which I have behind me, 12 Rules for Life. I can't recommend picking that up enough. And then I was fortunate enough to go see him live. And what he did for me was, we talked about those cliche sayings. He gets a lot of flack for being the Barney for adults because, he says things like clean up your room and tell the truth. But the funny thing is that people laugh at that. And how many of us tell those white lies? Like, would you let someone, some of you, if I said, hey, let me come see your bedroom, some of you would go into a panic because, there's like that little pile in the corner, you didn't make the bed this morning. And, that's kind of what he did was he broke down these very simple lessons that I think we take for granted. We have to remember not everybody got those lessons, those pathways embedded in them from a young age. And so, yeah, sometimes you need somebody to help carve out that path for you. But the other big thing he did in explaining, finding the meaning in suffering, but he also explained the scriptures in a way that I wish it would have, I wish that I would have learned the scriptures the way Dr. Jordan Peterson describes the psychological part of the scriptures. I wish I would have learned it that way in Catholic school instead of it just being fear and you are basically damned from day one and that's it. And all you can do is basically live your life in this repentance. And, I was raised in a family that very unfortunately, despite the fact that I was in a church almost 6 days a week, we didn't really live that life outside. Some people in my family really tried to push for it, but
this Jesus's message was based on love, compassion, and forgiveness. And, and I mentioned a podcast we did a while ago called Jesus the Socialist. And I try to explain to people that if love, compassion, and forgiveness isn't in their everyday life, then they might want to re-examine their identity as to what they call themselves.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I get a lot of flack for, I really do believe in, despite everything, you have to pursue the truth. You have to pursue the truth. It's the only way that you are going to be able to put your head down on the pillow at night and rest.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a lot of contradiction in the world right now. Like, I really feel like the people who sometimes have, hate has no home here and love is love and, all are accepted. They're some of the most ruthless people I've ever met. And that's where I really think people need to sit down with themselves and have those hard conversations, because you have to really look at what the persona you're putting out, but how are you actually putting that into practice?
Well, I often tell people in the 12-step rooms, your recovery work does not take place in here. It takes place out there.
Mm-hmm.
And in the therapy sessions, I'll tell people the change does not take place in here. It's the action and effort that you take out there.
Mm-hmm. That's the hard part, though.
You have to, that practice what you preach. Of course, it's, we have a saying in the 12-step world that you might be the only big book that people ever see.
Mm-hmm.
So how are you going? We model behavior. It's what I talk to parents about frequently, is modeling behavior for their children. We often talk about, I ask people to read the New Testament just in the terms of mindfulness, and what Jesus has probably gathered together 12 of the most stubborn, fearful men he could possibly imagine.
Mm-hmm.
But he was always saying to them, I'm right in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm right here.
Mm-hmm.
What are you afraid of?
Right. That's the faith part. And that's the hardest part. But the crazy thing is, for me, it's like when you really surrender to that, it's amazing the burden it for me anyway, it's relief, just having that faith and saying, okay, like, I'm really unsure, but I'm just going to have this faith that, things are going to work out, and I'm just going to keep trying to do my best and, aim towards that, highest goal that you can think of.
Well, the first step is the only one that mentions addiction. And Regina, everybody is in recovery from something, not necessarily drugs or alcohol. It says admitted you're powerless over whatever in your life's become unmanageable. I don't think most people understand that the unmanageability of their life isn't the car wrecks or the ruined finances or the health or the relationships. It's losing who you are. You mentioned earlier about your authentic self. Could you say more about that?
I think it was hard for me because when I started to, again, discover who I was and listening to my intuition, a lot of those truths were not the current trending thing. They were not the current thing that everybody was, screaming on mainstream media. And they were a lot of, somewhat controversial views. But again, I feel like you have to still allow those conversations and thoughts, or you're not being authentic. And that was the hard part of, like, trying to bring those conversations to the table, not in a aggressive or like damning or finger pointing way of just saying, like, well, hey, I know you've been saying this and I know that you really seems like you believe it, but what about like maybe some of this evidence, or what about like this possibility, whether it's with faith or whether it's with facts. And it's hard to do that sometimes, because I think sometimes we grab onto these ideologies and we make them who we are, instead of saying, no, this is just part of who I am. Like, I'm still Regina, like, even with, like, I was talking about the Libertarian Party, it's like with, I can range quite widely when it comes to certain social issues, and it's really only the Libertarian Party was the only thing I gravitated towards, because it was just honestly, one, it was the only party where I could come to the table and have a meaningful conversation, and we could have a back and forth, and nobody was trying to leave the table saying, well, I'm right. And I think that's part of that surrendering to your authentic self too, is you have to sometimes go, you know what? I never thought of it that way, and I'm glad we had this conversation.
It's all a matter of perspective, Regina.
Mm-hmm.
Quite often, and we always talk about this on the show, but at the rehabs, I'll do this interactive type of thing. I'll ask 4 or 5 people to stand in front of me, and I'll say, pretend I'm a smiling horse. Well, they usually pretty good sports. So they say, okay, you're a smiling horse. So I asked them to go around behind me, and I bend over. I say, now what do you see? And I get some pretty colorful comments then. But then I asked them the question, Regina. I said, who moved? And then they get the point. We did. I said, yes. Did the horse move? No. Who moved? We did. I said, so my point is that most people go through life trying to manipulate people, places, things, circumstances, and events to be the way that they want them to be, other than understanding that the horse doesn't move and they can change their perspective. Sometimes I'll ask people, which end of the horse are you looking at today?
Yeah, and for anybody listening, you know, especially I feel like people in my age range now, it's very hard to find commonality in our culture right now, in our society right now, with integrating with God or any form of the divine. And you know, if I have any message, it's that, you know, don't be afraid of the change. Like if that's what's calling you, if that's what's calling to your soul, you know, you'll find a group. Because that was my biggest fear, is I was like, I'm not going to find any, I'm going to be alone. And I had a huge fear for a long time of being alone. And it's like, you haven't met all the people who are going to love you yet. Like there's so much waiting for you down the road. There is so much love and acceptance and people who are gonna shape you in one way or another. It's like you cannot hold on to every little grain of sand today, because there's pyramids waiting for you in the distance.
So rather than obstacles, what I hear you telling us is you're looking for opportunities.
Oh, you have to. Every day I wake up.
Well, that's what I spend most of my time trying to convince people of that, yes, that they can change their attitude. And I think listening to you tonight was quite revelation. I think you have a willing audience, our audience, and you have a powerful message to carry to others.
I mean, really, it's just messages that have been ingrained in our DNA and society for a long time. I think it's just people need to be willing to kind of, you know, just kind of put your, you know, knee-jerk reactions aside and kind of put, you know, again, like everything, you know, I know we all try to have this identity, like this is who I am. And it's like, well, you might be able to become more than that if you just are willing to have the opportunity to have that conversation.
We can go beyond good to great. And there's 3 essentials to any recovery, Regina: honesty, open-mindedness, and a willingness to try. And if you have a few pixie dust sprinkles of those, you're on your way.
Yeah.
You're quite a delightful person. And we always, in my world, we always say, expect the unexpected. And I didn't expect to find such a well-spoken, intelligent, insightful young lady.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that.
No, that's the truth. If I thought you were a bag of moldy cheese, I would have gone around to gently telling you so.
Oh, good. Yeah, tell me when I'm being moldy, because I want to fix it. Yeah, don't be afraid of fear, and don't be afraid of you know, having those hard conversations with yourself.
So, what type of message would you like to leave our audience with? And I'm going to give you a little warning. Our guests, we often like to catch up with them in about another 6 months to see where they're at on their trip.
Yeah, I would love that. You know, especially with, I think in 6 months I'll be kind of at the very end of that wrestling journey, and you know, hopefully have a better. I have an idea of, you know, how I'm gonna manifest creating the space for, you know, God in my life, and really living to show people that, you know, it's not just a gimmick. It's really just authentically who I've become, and part of my journey. But I would think, and I'm kind of paraphrasing one of Dr. Peterson's messages of, don't be afraid to sacrifice who you are to become everything you can be.
I think that's an excellent way to leave this evening. You're a delightful young lady. You're always welcome here. Please do not be a stranger.
Thank you for having me. I can't wait to come back and talk with you again.
And at the end of every podcast, we offer a free prescription that can be filled anywhere. And that's fruits, nuts, and vegetables. Unplug your television and take up fishing. And for a truly mindful experience, we suggest that you fish without bait. Do a kindness for yourself and do a kindness for another. Forgive yourself and forgive another. If we are not God's children, none of us are. Till all are free, none are free. Namaste.
If you're interested in flying the colors of fishing without bait, click the shop icon on our website. We have clothing, mugs, cell phone cases, and so much more. Show the world that you fish without bait.